Sometimes you hear these politicians say things and you just kind of have to stop and think, wait, what?
Uh-huh.
Like when Trump said America doesn't need Canada,
Oh, yeah.
it got a lot of attention. But is there any truth to that? I mean, we've been following this story for a while now
Right.
and trying to keep everyone informed, and we're going to keep doing that. But today, we're going to dive deep
Yeah.
and look at the facts and figures to see just how important Canada really is
Right.
to the U.S. economy. What do you think?
Well, it's really interesting to look at because the economies of the U.S. and Canada are just so intertwined.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about trading a few things here and there. It's like this whole web
Right.
of really essential stuff that affects people every day on both sides of the border.
Yeah, it's like one giant system keeping things running smoothly.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of keeping things running, let's talk about energy.
Yeah.
Everyone needs energy.
Definitely. And Canada is actually the biggest energy supplier to the U.S. Yeah, they send a huge amount of crude oil south every day.
How much are we talking?
It's a crazy number, 3.8 million barrels every single day.
Every day. Wow.
And that makes up a huge percentage of all the oil the U.S. gets from other countries.
What percentage are we talking about?
62%.
Good.
Over half of all the oil the U.S. uses comes from Canada.
Those are big numbers. Really shows how much the U.S. depends on Canada for energy.
Absolutely.
And it's not just oil. I mean, Canada also supplies a lot of other energy sources as well.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Canada is a major supplier of natural gas, too.
Okay.
And hydroelectricity. A lot of U.S. states, especially up north, rely heavily on Canadian power.
Makes you wonder what would happen if that power suddenly stopped.
Oh, it would be chaos.
Yeah.
Widespread blackouts, a full-blown energy crisis.
Yeah. Really shows you how risky it can be
Yeah.
to rely so much on one source for anything.
For sure.
But okay, so beyond energy, there's another really important area where Canada plays a big part.
What's that?
Metals. The metals that power American industries, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. The aluminum in your car,
Right.
the steel beams in buildings, the copper wires in all our electronics.
Yeah.
A lot of that comes from Canada.
A lot of it.
Billions of dollars worth of these metals flow south every year. Aluminum, nickel, copper, steel, you name it.
Wow. So you're saying American industry really relies on Canadian resources?
So much. And don't forget about lumber, too. All that wood used to build houses across America.
Yeah.
A lot of that's coming from Canada.
I see. So even with all the trade disputes over lumber, the U.S. still relies heavily on Canadian imports.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. The Canadian government actually subsidizes its lumber industry.
So what does that mean?
They help lower the cost of producing lumber,
Okay.
which means Canadian lumber ends up being cheaper for U.S. buyers.
So American businesses and consumers benefit from those lower prices.
They do?
But what about Canada?
Well, for Canada, it's a bit of a trade-off. They're helping out the U.S., but it can cost their own economy.
That's a really interesting point. So we've talked about energy, metals, and now lumber. Canada's impact on the U.S. is pretty substantial.
It's a huge impact. And we haven't even touched on food yet.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Canada's a big supplier of food to the U.S. as well, isn't it?
Huge. Canada exports tons of essential foodstuffs south every year, things like wheat.
For bread and all that?
Exactly. Wheat for bread and pork.
Oh, wow.
For all those dinner tables across America.
It makes you wonder how many people realize that the food they eat
Right.
might have actually come from Canada.
It's about more than just adding variety to the American diet. It's about food security. Canada plays a crucial part in making sure there's enough food to go around and that it's affordable.
And don't forget about all the other food exports, too.
Oh, you're right. There's maple syrup, seafood, dairy products.
Yeah.
Canadian goods are all over U.S. grocery store shelves.
So we've got energy, metals, food. It's really starting to paint a picture of just how big a role Canada plays in keeping the U.S. economy going.
It's undeniable, a remarkable level of interdependence. And, perhaps the most compelling example of this is the automotive industry.
Really? The auto industry? How so?
Well, picture this. A single car part crossing back and forth between the U.S. and Canada multiple times during the manufacturing process.
Wow, that's cool.
That's how intertwined the auto industry is between the two countries.
That's amazing. Really shows a deep level of collaboration and trust, going beyond just basic trade agreements.
Absolutely. And the impact goes beyond just keeping factories running. This level of collaboration creates jobs on both sides of the border and helps keep prices down for consumers.
It's a win-win for everyone.
Exactly.
Until someone says they don't need the other guy.
Right.
Right.
It makes you wonder, what would happen if all this trade between Canada and the U.S. suddenly stopped? Like, what if Canada just turned off the tap, so to speak? That's a great question, and one with potentially huge consequences. We should explore that, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if Canada actually stopped all trade with the U.S., the effects would be felt immediately
Oh, for sure.
and across the board.
Yeah.
Like energy costs would skyrocket across the whole U.S.,
Yeah.
leading to higher prices for businesses and consumers.
And that would hit everyone's pocketbook pretty hard.
Uh-huh.
What about those industries that rely on Canadian metals?
Oh, they would be in trouble,
Yeah.
facing serious shortages. Production lines could shut down, people could lose their jobs,
Yeah.
it would destabilize the economy, and the effects would trickle down to everyday people, too.
So we could see prices go up on everything.
Potentially, yeah. Cars, electronics,
Right.
not to mention the impact on construction and infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about. It's like a domino effect.
It is, yeah. And we can't forget about the potential for food shortages and price increases at the grocery store.
Right.
Finding new sources for all the food that Canada supplies would be incredibly difficult.
It's a lot of food.
It is.
It really underscores how closely connected our two economies are.
Yeah,
Some states would feel it more than others, wouldn't they?
definitely.
Like Michigan, for example. Their auto industry relies so heavily on Canadian parts.
Oh, yeah, they'd be hit hard. And New York, too, because they depend so much on Canadian energy.
Yeah.
Really, any state that does a lot of trade with Canada would be vulnerable.
It's not a pretty picture.
No.
But some people still downplay the importance of the relationship between the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah.
And then something like a crisis happens, and suddenly everyone remembers they need Canada.
Yeah.
Like the California wildfires, remember those?
Oh, right.
When Trump said they should import water from Canada to help fight the fires?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of goes against that whole we don't need Canada thing, doesn't
That
it?
does, yeah. And you know, how California manages its water is a whole other conversation. But the fact remains that in times of crisis, the U.S. has turned to Canada for help. And not just for water either. Canada has sent firefighters and other resources to help the U.S. during all sorts of natural disasters.
It's like a family, I guess. You might fight sometimes, but when things get tough, you're there for each other.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And like any family, there's always room for improvement.
Right.
Like this whole softwood lumber thing.
Oh, yeah. That's been going on forever.
The U.S. says that Canada unfairly subsidizes its lumber industry, making it hard for American companies to compete. It just creates tension.
Yeah, it does. And then there's the fact that Canada sometimes feels like it's playing second fiddle to the U.S., always having to bend over backwards to make the U.S. happy.
It's true. There have been times when it seems like the U.S. has just disregarded the importance of the partnership, like when Trump put tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, saying it was for national security.
Mm-hmm.
That felt like a real betrayal.
It did. Those kinds of actions really damage trust and create a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, it's hard for Canada to keep pushing for cooperation when it feels like the U.S. is just taking advantage.
I understand. But despite all that, the reality is that the U.S. and Canada are deeply connected, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Our economies are practically inseparable.
Right.
Trying to untangle them would be a disaster for both countries.
And I think more and more people are starting to realize that.
I hope so, especially as the world faces all these increasingly complex challenges, like climate change, for example.
Right.
That's something that demands global cooperation.
Absolutely.
Canada and the U.S. have to work together to deal with that, no matter what their economic or political differences might be.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And there are so many other areas where we could be working together.
Mhm.
I mean, Canada has all these incredible natural resources.
Yeah,
And the U.S. has a huge economy and a powerful military.
right.
If we join forces, think of what we could accomplish.
It's true. And it's important to remember that this relationship is about more than just money and trade.
Oh, yeah.
It's about shared values, working towards the same goals, and believing in the power of collaboration.
It's about knowing that we're stronger together than we are apart.
Exactly. And that's a message that we need to hear, especially these days when everything seems so divided and uncertain.
So where do we go from here? What's next for the U.S. and Canada? I mean, it's a vital relationship,
Yeah.
but it seems like people forget about it pretty easily.
I think both countries need to kind of change how they look at this relationship.
Okay.
We need to stop thinking just about what's in it for me, that short-term thinking,
Yeah,
and really focus on the bigger picture, the long-term benefits of working together.
that makes sense. It's about thinking strategically, not just going for the quick win.
Exactly. We need to figure out what each country is good at and how we can use those strengths together to reach common goals.
Okay, I like that. So, for example, what about renewable energy? Canada has all that potential for hydroelectric power,
Right.
and the U.S. is really leading the way in solar and wind technology.
Yeah,
Could we work together on that?
definitely. If the US and Canada teamed up, we could really speed up the shift to clean energy. And that would create jobs and boost the economy on both sides of the border.
That's a win-win. And what about the Arctic? I mean, with climate change opening up new shipping routes and all that, the Arctic's becoming a pretty strategic place.
Absolutely. Canada and the US need to be on the same page to make sure the Arctic stays peaceful and stable.
Right.
That means working together on things like protecting the environment, doing scientific research, and respecting the rights of indigenous peoples.
It sounds like the relationship between the U.S. and Canada goes way beyond just trade and economics.
It really does. It's about shared values, common goals, and really believing in the power of working together.
It's that idea that we're stronger together than we are on our own.
Exactly. And that message is so important right now with all the division and uncertainty in the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
Well, Canada's role in the U.S. economy and beyond is absolutely essential. It's not just empty talk. It's about real things: energy, food, materials, jobs,
Yeah.
things that affect everyday people on both sides of the border.
And I think it's important to remember that needing each other isn't a weakness, it's actually a strength.
You're right. In this interconnected world, no country can honestly say they don't need their neighbors.
We need each other now more than ever. And that's our deep dive for today. Be sure to subscribe for more insightful explorations of the topics that matter.